But thank you. I hope you can hear that this clearly enough. And a big thanks to Romain and Samuel and David for the whole project, and also for hosting today's event in English, because my French is really rather poor at the moment. And fascinating to hear Yuan also. I heard France Musique in about 1977 when the weather changed and we could hear the FM radio in the south of England pretty clearly. And then there was Radio France Hector on digital satellite, 24-hour. That was the first automated radio station I heard, Radio France Hector, 24 hours a day, digital music all the time. And now we listen to FIP. This all leads into what inspired me to get involved with using Liquidsoap. My background was once in the BBC, where still to this day there's very little automation going on, very little voice tracking particularly. But at the same time, I was using on my Windows desktop a player called Fubar. And Fubar, the player, has a really useful crossfading device. The Fubar Crossfading device looks automatically for the end of the audio on a track. It looks for the audio to fall below a certain level, and then it starts the next track. And I thought, well, I'm watching people on other radio stations, because by this time I had a job in commercial radio, reading the news. And I'd seen in commercial radio, people were manipulating the ends of tracks and working very hard on their mixes in voice-tracked shows using things like RCS, Zeta. And I thought, well, what if I combined that with something like the Fubar automatic next track selector? And when I read about Liquidsoap, and I knew a bit about FFmpeg because I'd been using it since about 2007, the two came together, and I thought, what if I could use FFmpeg with Liquidsoap? And so it turned out to be that FFmpeg, even at version 1.4.3, has some pretty good integration with FFmpeg. And the lovely thing is, of course, now I've seen that presentation about version 2, I know that what I'm about to tell you will become even more integrated with Liquidsoap. So we've got that to look forward to. And oh yeah, that's the perfect face for radio. Sorry about that. So at the moment, I'm not using Liquidsoap in my commercial radio work, but it's ready, almost ready to go if I choose to open some sort of radio consultancy. And at the moment, it's in use full-time here. It just runs and runs and runs for months at a time, unless my Linux box accidentally updates itself and doesn't tell me first. And what I've done is bring together a stream of music and news. The music you'll see is not only carefully chosen, but it's very cleverly sequenced using FFmpeg to determine when to start and finish each individual track. So I do listen to that when I'm writing and getting ready to read the news, because it contains news scraped from other services around the world, so I can be informed about what's going on when I'm preparing the bulletins for my own commercial radio station here. Now, I hardly need to explain this, because, of course, our friends earlier on in the day explained what FFmpeg is in terms of how it's going to integrate with Liquidsoap in the future. It's not just a command line program or a tool for pirates. I'm thinking of the awful things that happened with YouTube DL a few weeks ago. FFmpeg certainly isn't out of date. I freshly compile it all the time. It's not full of patent problems at all. Yes, it does require some technical knowledge, but to be honest, the technical knowledge required to understand the language that Liquidsoap is written in, and I'm smiling as I say this, the technical language to understand the Liquidsoap language, the technical information needed to understand it is rather greater than is needed to understand FFmpeg. And it also helps to understand really what you're doing with the streams, the pictures, and the sound data that goes through FFmpeg. So the more you can learn about how containers are put together and how codecs work, the more fruitful your own use of FFmpeg is going to be. And this is why I'm sure FFmpeg has become so integrated with Liquidsoap, world-leading multimedia manipulation framework. So many worldwide broadcasters, national broadcasters, major commercial broadcasters use elements of the FFmpeg multimedia framework to encode, distribute, and manipulate what they're doing. So I won't dwell on this too much, except to say it is cross-platform. So although I regularly compile FFmpeg and a whole other suite of things for a Windows machine, on the Linux machine at the back of this studio, running quietly all the time, that FFmpeg is also self-compiled, mostly because I want a particular codec in there that isn't part of the usual FFmpeg distribution. Now, you'll have seen, and if you're familiar with Liquidsoap, you'll have seen that FFmpeg can be used even at this stage, 1.4.3, in all sorts of ways. There's Liquidsoap's own internal, Samuel, yes, I think you know which one. Well, no, I'll take that question at face value. It's the Fraunhofer codec. Samuel's just asked me a question on chat. It's the Fraunhofer FDK AAC codec. I mean, let's look at it this way. Fraunhofer Institute practically invented the human ear, if you look at the research they're doing. But I do find that their FDK AAC codec, rewrapped from the code released for Android, rewrapped in as a library that can be used in FFmpeg, gives me extremely good quality at low bandwidth. And I'll turn to why I'm interested in low bandwidth in just a second. But there are some of the functions that you can use right now with Liquidsoap to output to FFmpeg. And what I use using the IceCast output is I use FFmpeg as the external gateway to interface with an IceCast server. So I use the %external formula, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. Also, within my script for running Liquidsoap, I have set FFmpeg to be the decoder for everything. So in section 3 in this slide, what I've done is I've turned off GStreamer. I don't use it for anything, but I've told Liquidsoap, and forgive me if this code is wrong, I've experimented with it and it works, and I don't really understand the language fully, but it works for me. So I've told the code to use FFmpeg to decode all these different file extensions or file types. The only one that actually gets used is Matroska Audio, MKA, but you'll see how that happens. The other thing I want to mention right now is that this online stream that I have that could be part of a broadcast station scrapes audio from other sources. So it scrapes the audio from independent radio news, the one of the network providers of national and international news for commercial radio. They put a bulletin online, the top of the hour bulletin at about 10 minutes past every hour for anyone to use. And I just insert that into my stream. So while I'm working, there's an interruption in the music at about 17 minutes past the hour, and there's the latest news, so I can hear what's going on. The code I've written here under section 4 of this slide shows how I scrape CBS news. I like to hear what's happening in America. They have an app where the latest CBS newscast is put up every hour. The newscast is a 5-minute newscast with a break for a commercial at about 2 minutes 50. I don't want the commercial, I just want to hear the first 2 minutes 50 of the bulletin. So with that line of code, I split up the audio that comes from CBS into about 2 minutes 45. Then I look for a gap in the audio between about 2 minutes 45 and about 2 minutes 55. And if FFmpeg sees a gap in that spot, that's where it chops the newscast and then squirts it using Telnet into the queue for me to listen to. So that rather complex code there at number 4 splits up the newscast, looks for a gap at a particular place, and very rarely gets it wrong. But if in a professional situation, you're needing to look for potential out points in longer reports, in longer programs, and you know that there's a potential out point somewhere within a few seconds of audio, you can pinpoint where that is and make a cut, and then insert that into Liquidsoap using that code. And the other thing, this is really the hub of what this is about, is as a preparation tool for the audio. This is going right back to that sequencer, that crossfading device in Fubar, except this isn't crossfading. When I used to present music programs for commercial radio years ago, what I found was that the best way to start a new record was not to crossfade, but to wait for a natural fade point in the outgoing record, and then start the incoming record at full volume or very close to full volume. So this is what it does, and I'll show you how that's done in this particular situation. The first thing to do, if I'm preparing a new playlist or a new set of files to add to my playlist, which is several thousand long at the moment, I put them into a directory, or rather, I make a playlist. And from that playlist, which gets put together in Fubar, I then drop that playlist into a Python program that begins to look at all those files and analyze them using FFmpeg for broadcast through Liquidsoap. First thing, how do I ensure that a file, an actual piece of data from beginning to end, has not been previously encoded? Because to encode that file again would just be a waste of coding time, particularly when you're looking through a playlist of some 3,000 or 4,000. Yeah, Ewan, that's a lovely manual, the FFmpeg manual. When you're looking through so many thousand tracks. So I use the hash function. FFmpeg can analyze incoming audio data within a container and print a hash, which is just a representation of a sum of some sort based on that audio. And it's very, very unlikely, extremely unlikely, that two different pieces of audio data would have the same hash. And what I've done here, just in case you're not familiar with the FFmpeg command line, is I've analyzed the FFmpeg command line that I use in my work to show you how it's done. That way I look only at the audio channel that's in any incoming file and produce a hash from it. And there, at the top of this, oh good, you can see the little red dot, I hope. I'm coming to acoustic ID. Yes, thank you for mentioning acoustic ID. That's the next bit. And that's even more fun than this. This is just to check that I've not encoded the same file before. So there's the FFmpeg command line. And here, MD5 equals, there's the hash. That hash is of the unique audio data contained within that FFmpeg file. And when I'm then putting don't worry, Gilo, when I'm putting the file into the directory, having processed it for broadcast, I add that hash to the file name. So here are some files, and there is the hash within the file name. So all I have to do is compare this hash here that FFmpeg comes up with the part of the file name that contains the hash. And if two of them match, we know we've already touched that file. We don't need to rewrap it or re-encode it. To be honest, these days I don't re-encode, I rewrap, because FFmpeg can read all the incoming files anyway. Then we start to prepare it for the playlist. Now we'll come back to acoustic ID in a short time. That's further down this presentation. We're going to prepare it. How loud is the file? We know that many incoming files from commercial download services have replay volume data associated with them. I don't use that. I use the EBU R128 loudness measurement. It's not perfect, particularly if you're a fan of jazz music and big bands with trumpets blaring. That really knocks the EBU R128 level. But in this particular case, I analyzed the data, the sound for the EBU R128 level, find its statistics. There's a bit of the output from FFmpeg when you're looking at the EBU R128 level. And down here is the loudness of the file. This is how loud it is according to the EBU R128 measurements. And therefore, having seen that volume, you can determine, having seen that loudness, you can determine how loud you want the track to be played when it goes into Liquidsoap. And Liquidsoap has an easy way of adjusting that within the playlist. So that, with some mathematical manipulation, becomes the related to the volume at which the track is played. One more thing about this, I'm looking for the end of the track as well. and the start of the track for that matter. So this data, this is the end of a file in EBU R128 measurements taken 10 times every second. And what I do is I look back from the end of the file until we see where the audio dips by 8 decibels below the track's average volume. Once we found where it goes 8 dB low for the last time, I assume that that is the end of the track, and that is where we can play another song. If the track is fading, generally by the time it's faded by 8, well, not 8 dB to be honest, 8 loudness units, that's a good time to start the next track. Some tracks require sensitivity for the long fade out. Bohemian Rhapsody is one of those examples. If you think of the end of Bohemian Rhapsody, it has that long piano solo with Freddie Mercury singing over it, rather quieter than the rest of the track. And so there's a bit of code in my Python program that looks for the long tail and starts the next track later on. And similarly, if you reverse all the EBU R128 outputs from FFmpeg, you can determine where a track starts. And this is something that I know Roman has worked on very hard with me lately, determining how FFmpeg finds the start of a track and how to fast forward into a track so it starts at exactly the right point. If you want to look at the source code of this, it's all on my GitHub. Then that information about where the track ends and where it starts and how loud it's going to be, we put into the annotate protocol in an M3U8 playlist. And there's an example of the M3U8 playlist that has all these tags, and Liquidsoap reads those tags and plays without manual intervention, the most beautifully, artistically sequenced, most of the time, set of tracks. One thing about replay gain. Now, I think, Roman, again, this is something you told me, that this is you have 64-bit internal processing. So the default volume is really quite low that I use, the idea being that there's no chance that the audio is going to clip. If you just adjust replay gain by the average volume of a track, you'll very often find that the louder portions of that track, if they are short, they will clip. So we turn the volume quite a low way down because there's room for it in the 64 bits of audio that are coded into the inside of Liquidsoap. Yeah, and those are the lines in my script. Thank you, Samuel. Yes, 64 bits. Those are the lines in my script that allow the playlist to sequence beautifully. I don't have any fade-ins or fade-outs. I just have overlap, but the overlap starts at a particular point. Now, this is where Chromaprint and audio fingerprinting comes in, because when you have a playlist of thousands of tracks and you're doing it just in your own time in the background of your ordinary job, you often find that you've put two pieces of music in which might have different metadata, but it's actually the same song. So with FFmpeg, you can also compile a thing called a Chromaprint library, which looks at the bands of frequencies at set points in a file, and from that you can create an audio fingerprint. Now, I don't use FFmpeg for this because I couldn't quite work out the output format, so I used Chromaprint's own internal utility program, fpcalc, and using this command line you see there, I produce an output which is then further processed to produce a sequence of numbers which represent frequency bands across the musical scale in levels of 0 to 3. These correspond to strengths of audio across 16 frequency bands. Once you've got that print, and by the way, you have to be careful to knock the any silence off the front of that. Once you've got that print, you can then use a fuzzy matching algorithm, Levenstein matching, for example, and you can access that quite quickly through Python, to determine how close two fingerprints are. And although if you have, say, 4,000 tracks, you have millions and millions of combinations of those tracks, you'll find that if you have, say, a 4-core processor with hyperthreading, as this box under my desk has, that I built in 2016, you'll find that you can whip through, using Python's multiprocessing algorithms, you can whip through those millions of combinations in about 3 or 4 hours. Set it going, go and have a long lunch, come back, and it's weeded out, or it's told you what the likely duplicates are. And what my algorithm does, again, it's all on GitHub, is give you a number, which is the likely possibility that two tracks are the same, and then names the two tracks. So for example, in this little list I've given at the bottom here, the first two tracks actually are musically similar for the first 20 seconds, but they are not identical. So there's only a match of 70 there. But the next track, look at the metadata for this. This is the Dusty Springfield song off the Dusty in Memphis album, Willie and Laura Mae Jones. The two, yes, it is Shazam rescripted. Everybody else has done this. I've just done it myself with open source software so I can understand it. But the, Sherry, it is a fantastic album. I love listening to that. My wife's American. We love hearing that particular recording. And there's Willie and Laura Mae Jones with two different sets of metadata. The titles are similar. It's the same song. I think the stereo channels are reversed in one of those dubs as well. But the algorithm has picked it up and given us a likelihood of 83% that those two tracks are the same. Then there's the Marcos Valle song, which in English is called Crickets Sing for Anna Maria. In Portuguese, it's Os Grilos, or however you pronounce it. And those two particular tracks, although the metadata is different, they're almost the same, 92%. And then there's a recording of Express Yourself. Again, metadata is different, but the algorithm has detected the audio is the same. So by putting that into a CSV file, dropping it into Excel, you can quickly remove what's there. The last thing I want to mention is the on-air sound. FFmpeg's extraordinary audio filtering allows you to produce any number of outputs depending on your audience. I have one output for listening in the car or the kitchen. It's a noisy environment. I turn the bandwidth right down. This is the beauty of the FDK AAC encoder. It's 32-bit kilobit per second encoding, if you feed it correctly, is quite wonderful. And then, Skyrock. Now, I noticed in your source code, you have a preset for audio called Skyrock. I remember driving into France in 1987, and I turned the radio on, and there was this radio station. It was so loud, you could boil a cup of tea on it. It was so loud, and that was Skyrock. I'd never heard processing like it. We didn't have that in the UK at that time. So what I've done with FFmpeg is put my audio into 5 separate bands. You could put it into any number of bands and multi-band process it. Then I have another stream of high fidelity listening, which is just EBU R128 loudness adjusted with a bit of limiting on the top. Beautiful limiter in FFmpeg, by the way. That's the multi-band 32 kilobits per second channel. There we are, audio resample rate 32 kilobits, so we're not telling the encoder to do too much. Here are the 5 bands of audio. There's a limiter at the end of it as well, I think, and that sounds really hot. I'll give you the URL for that. The limiter in FFmpeg, I must say, is fantastic. It's a delay line limiter, and if you oversample before you limit, and if you know Nyquist and Shannon, you'll know why you have to oversample and then resample at the end of it. The audio output that comes out, that is just something from one of my news bulletins yesterday. I use the same limiter. It is flat as a pancake on the top. It's an extremely good limiter. It does not overshoot. By the way, it's not a substitute for a proper FM limiter if you're using FM radio, because FM radio has pre-emphasis, and you need to consider what's happening to the top end with your pre-emphasis as well. So those are 4 streams that I create using that script in the little machine behind me. It's an ancient, it's 10-year-old HP box that somebody was throwing out. Gilot, no, I haven't tried to use the limit operator with Liquidsoap yet. I've just used FFmpeg because I'm used to how it works. Pitfalls, if you're using FFmpeg, with the FDK AAC encoding library, yes, you often do have to compile it yourself. I put my own compilations for Windows up on my GitHub. You can access it through GitHub if you really want it. Oversampling, if you're going to do limiting, very important because of what happens near the limit of a waveform. If you consider what happens between 2 samples at the top of the waveform, you've got to oversample to prevent overshoot. And I don't feed WAV format into FFmpeg. I feed raw data, because a couple of years ago I noticed that FFmpeg strictly abided by the limits of WAV files and cut off after a time. And a couple of hints with encoding: wherever you're encoding, do not use too many samples per second. Only encode what you want. Give the encoder less to do. And I think that's all I wanted to say about FFmpeg. And I'm sorry, I'm 6 minutes over time. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for this great talk. I didn't know that FFmpeg could be pushed to this so far.
It's wonderful. Have a listen to those streams if you've got time. They're in the slides, and see what you like.
Yeah, that's great. So are there any questions, or anyone wants a very long FFmpeg command line? Or
well, it's going to become easier because of the way you've encoded version 2. You can put all of this inside FFmpeg. You've opened up every filter within FFmpeg now for use in Liquidsoap.
Yeah, that's romance work. Yeah, that's great. But also, you had LATSPA before, and there are lots of LATSPA plugins. So I think someone mentioned that, maybe Gilou. So
Yes.
Yes, Gilou did.
That was a question. He answered it, but actually have quite some capability in Liquidsoap, and I am amazed by what you just mentioned, just technically, and that we can do with FFmpeg. But I would love to have the actual API for Liquidsoap to work like that.
Well, surely
we'll talk about
version
it
2 will do. Surely version 2 will do that.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So are there any other questions? No. If not, I guess we should thank you again very much for your great talk. And
so good of you to invite me to take part, and I really look forward to experimenting with version 2 when it's ready to go, and using this in a more commercial setup. I don't know, when the coronavirus becomes so bad that my radio station closes down, then I am forced to go out on my own, and Liquidsoap will be there.
I certainly hope so. Okay, thank you very much.